Okay, next up in the game, we are going to go over planets and sectors. Now, the planets and sectors view gives you a summary of all your planets that you own, and in later on in a game, this is one of my earlier, one of my saved games from a quite late on in the quite late on in the game, and I'm actually looking after around 70-ish planets. Um, Normally, when you're looking after your first system, like you are at the very beginning of the game, it's not too difficult to control. But when you get up to a large volume of planets, you want to have the AI look after them for you. So that is the points of the planet and sector system. The planets and sectors do also show individual planets as well. So if you want a summary of what one planet is doing, so if you're looking for a planet that's really high in, for example, energy generation, you can go through this list. You can find which one is producing a high amount of energy, a high amount of minerals, high amount of unity, all these types of research. It's just a summary screen for you, so you don't have to go around and look at every single planet in the game. Now, managing sectors. So, once your empire gets to a certain size, there is a limit. You're given a limit at the start of the game. You can see in here at the moment, I'm looking after 7 systems out of a potential 12. You can, there's no, I can take that down to 1 if I want, or I can take it all the way to 12 if I want. It's just how many you think you can personally look after. Now, when it gets to a point where you find that you can't manage it yourself, where you're looking after so many systems in the game, you can have what's known as a sector manager and a sector governor look after it for you. So you can see up here, you've got a limit to the amount of sectors you can have. So at the moment, mine is 23 sectors. I'm using nowhere near that. Depending on how you want to play the game as well, you may want to use more sectors or less sectors. Now, what's the point of a sector, you ask? Now, sectors are, first of all, however many stars you want to choose. So at the moment you can see there's a white outline in my space. That is a sector. I've got another sector at the top of the map here, just a small one. Just where I've started to take a few systems in the game from one of the Fallen Empires, one of the other AIs in the game. Now, this is one sector and this is another sector. You can't have one sector being a system on its own. For example, if I was to take a system over here, it can't be a part of this sector on the right. They would both have to be unique sectors, so they all have to be adjoining systems. So you can see here, this one is actually on its own at the moment, but because these systems are right next to it, I can click here, and it's now part of this sector. So the sector manager will manage anything that's in that system for me as well. You can control what your sector manager does. So at the moment, sector settings. Now this is the point of having smaller sectors, if you wanted to have smaller sectors, that is. I personally don't, but it's each to their own opinion. You can have the sector manager do something specific in an area of a space. So you can decide if you want it to have balanced, if you want it to have an agricultural focus, so you're producing a lot of food, an industrial focus, so it generates a lot of minerals, or a research focus, so it's generating a lot of research, or a financial focus, where it concentrates on energy. Personally, I always go for large sectors and leaving them unbalanced, because you can vary it up depending on what your own personal playstyle is, but I find the balanced one is the best because it gives you quite literally a balanced view of everything. It gives you a reasonable amount of minerals, a reasonable amount of energy, research, you name it, it does it really well. Now, there's also a set of sub-options here you can do. You can control what your sector is also doing. So the downside, so to speak, of putting your systems in a sector is there is a pool of resources that's constantly going towards you for as long as they're not in a sector. When they get put into a sector, the resources that sector is gathering get distributed into 2 different pools. Now, there's a pool for the sector itself, and there's the pool for you. So, as a default, it's 50-50. You can adjust it. So, like you can see here, the sector is currently giving us 25% of their monthly production of energy credits. You can adjust it manually yourself, so you can change it between 25, 50, 75, or you can tell them to keep all the minerals themselves. Now, you can adjust this according to the sector size. So at the moment, you can see here the little sector I've got at the moment up at the top. I left that on 25% They're only having to give us a small amount of minerals. Now, what's the point of that, you're asking? Well, like I said, when your sector manager looks after the system for you, things get built in those sectors. So if you have, for example here, military stations, space construction, colonizing, you can have the minerals that are in that area. The governor, which is the person over here on the left, will look after that sector for you and will invest the minerals that's being generated in that sector into military stations, space construction, or colonizing new planets. So you don't have to do everything yourself. Your governor will do a degree of it for you. A couple of other things that those minerals are spent on: redeveloping, building robots. They are planetary development things. They are used on an individual planet basis. So your governor will look at a planet and go, ooh, actually this structure might be better here rather than this structure. So what it will do is deconstruct a structure and rebuild it as another one. That's the redevelopment option. Building robots. It just so happens that I'm playing a robot empire on this game, so I needed that turned on. Some of you will decide against building robots, some of you will build for robots. It depends on the type of empire that you've decided to build in the game. Some may decide against it, so I happen to have it turned on this one. Respecting tile resources. Now, when you take control of a planet, you're also given a selection of tiles. Now, each one of those tiles will either have a resource or won't have a resource. So, for example, if I pick a planet here, my home world, if I go to my surface, now if I click on this tile here, you can see originally this actually had just one mineral on it. So that is called a tile resource. Now if I have the respect the tile resource option enabled, it means that the structure that's going to be built on that tile is going to be one that specializes in minerals, and sure enough, this one is actually a mineral network building, which does increase the amount of minerals that tile has from 1 to an additional 7. 1 to 7, I should say. That is what respect tile development does. Let's have a look. Go back onto here. Sector settings. That's that one. Oh, and colonizing, as I say, there may be, it just so happens in this game that I have planets all colonized. Every single one in my sector is colonized. If I look at one of my neighbors here, you can see there's a series of green planets. These are planets that my colleague owns, my ally owns, but hasn't colonized. If you have the colonized setting enabled, it just means that they're going to perhaps find a planet and colonize it if required. You can always find out what your colony or what your sector is doing. This little thought bubble here, if you mouse over it, it actually tells you what they're planning on doing. So at the moment, they're currently constructing one building, one station. They're producing, or they're constructing 3 populations, which is the robots. They're building 3 sets of robots. They're planning on constructing, a mechanical population template. So what does that mean? It means at the moment, they lack the resources to do it. So as you can see, there's 7.6 minerals allocated out of the 30 required. So once that sector reaches the 30 minerals, it means that they will start construction on the drone grid. That's what their actual plan is. But these guys up here, they're currently constructing 1 building, they're currently recruiting 5 armies, and they're currently constructing 8 populations. Now, they're not short of resources. Because this sector is so huge, they're not planning on actually constructing anything. They are purely constructing things. So the bigger you make your sector, the essentially more minerals it's producing, but in turn they're also developing a lot faster. So where possible, I think personally having bigger sectors is a better option. Now, when you're pooling resources like that, you can actually pillage essentially your own region. So if you're in desperate need, you've built lots of ships, unfortunately you've lost your war, and you need a nice stockpile of resources to rebuild the war machine, to resupply yourself with enough minerals and enough energy to start producing ships again. Well, you can see here this option allows you to drain 75% of that stockpile in turn of 100 influence. So the influence is what you use to settle on planets. It's also what you use to build frontier outposts to extend your own borders. So if you're not planning on either extending your borders or you're not planning on colonizing any new planets, it's also used, I should say, for recruiting new leaders. So if you're not planning on recruiting any new leaders, again, 100 influence isn't the greatest amount. That's normally around enough to recruit one leader. So you can get away with it. It basically, you pay that 100 influence and you get 75% of those resources. So as you can see here, if I was to drain 75% of those resources, it would give me 44,000 minerals and 22,500 energy credits, which is great if I'm in desperate need for it. Otherwise, as long as the sector has something that needs building and needs constructing, I'm going to leave it there and allow them to produce those structures for the minerals they're using. You can adjust the amount that you're giving them. As I said, they're not supplying us with any, so my energy just went into a deficit of 133, so I'm actually in need of some of the energy. But that's if I just want them to massively concentrate on development, or if I've got a big enough income enough myself that I'm not actually spending as much as I'd like to. If I'm spending as much as I want to. So, I say I build 10 ships, and by the time those 10 ships are built, I have enough minerals to build another 10 ships. Then I'm actually running like in an excess, so I can actually give the region a little bit more currency if I want to. So, at the moment, I can run it at, the sector is giving us 25% because it still gives me a positive amount of energy credits. I don't need a huge amount of energy credits at the moment. You can manually give an area minerals and energy credits, as you can see here. This smaller sector at the top, it currently only has 12 minerals in its stockpile, so I can actually give this area out of my personal pool some minerals. You can see here, if you click once, it just gives 100. If you press control when you click it, it actually gives them 1,000. So you can, those planning on constructing, so the one where they get 30 minerals and the one when they got 90 minerals, they now have enough minerals so that if the game wasn't paused, they would be able to actually start construction on those. So you can donate minerals that way as well. And okay, the other bits on here is you can see the governor that is looking after the sector or the individual planet. And you can also see the population type that's on the planet. So, for example here, 3C is my my actual homeworld. My homeworld is comprised of battle bears, which are cyborgs, because space bears. And they're also made up of rogue drones. So you can see the population distribution for your empire. Because I am a machine empire, most of these are assimilated creatures. So Ixildar are actually, as you can see there, they're hive-minded. So I imagine they are being purged from my empire because they're not robots. So eventually they'll all be killed. But you'll be able to see the distribution of your population, so you can see whereabouts everyone is. The other thing this screen does is show you modules. Now, what are modules? Modules are, once you have a spaceport in orbit, you can develop modules for your spaceport. Now, if you have 6 empty tiles here, it normally means that the spaceport has been constructed, but nothing has been built on it. If there's an empty space like there is here, it means that the structure doesn't actually have a spaceport in orbit. It doesn't mean that the option's there not to have one, or the option is there to have one. Habitats in this example aren't actually eligible for spaceports because essentially they are spaceports. You can build habitats around bodies in the universe that can't actually can't actually host life, so to speak. So, for example, this one's in my home system. I have a habitat in orbit around Mercury, and I have a habitat in orbit around Venus. I have a habitat in orbit around Jupiter, which I haven't actually inhabited yet, and I have one around Saturn and one around Utopia Prime, which is actually Mars. Because Mars wasn't technically colonizable, I was able to build a habitat and later on then build a spaceport when I actually terraformed Mars to make it livable. Yeah. So governors. Okay, so governors. Governors are shown on the left here. So I have one governor looking after this sector, which is this guy here, and one governor looking after this sector, which is this guy here. If you click them, it takes you straight to the leader screen, which I will cover in another video shortly, but then you just select a governor and he'll look after that region for you. That is the planets and sectors section.